All right, and I see by the clock on the wall, actually my phone, that it's 4 o'clock. So,
No, it's 8 o'clock.
depending on where you are, it's the top of the hour, and if you're in Newfoundland, it's half an hour later. That's a Canadian joke, which Canadians might laugh at.
And it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere. And the answer is yes, it's 5 o'clock in Atlanta, Canada. I should call my sister and suggest she have a beer. She doesn't drink beer. That's not important right now. Hello, everyone. Good local time to you all. My name is Alex Beamish of the Toronto Perlmongers. Great to see all these folks here. We're going to have a great talk from Dave Cross, who is coming to us from Old Blighty, I guess. Anyway, he's in a different time zone. It's 8 o'clock there. And Dave Cross has done a bunch of, written a bunch of CPAN modules. He's written books, and the one that he's going to talk about today is Data Munging. And I wanted to ask if you're going to talk about the origin of the word munge. That we can leave that for the Q&A later, because I know the answer to that, but
yeah. I mean, there are different answers to that question depending on the audience.
Oh, well, I think I know one from the early 80s, but we'll get on to that. Okay, I will stop blathering. Dave, the floor is yours. Please take it away.
Great. Let me do the screen sharing thing. I think this is the right, no, that's the right screen to share.
And I'm just going to jump in quickly. If anybody is not muted, please mute yourself. Thank you.
Okay. Can everyone, well, I mean, obviously you're all muted, but I'm assuming that you can see my screen. Okay.
Yeah, your screen looks great. Thanks, Dave.
Okay. Yes. So thank you to the Toronto Perlmongers for inviting me to give this talk. It's quite a big thing to follow, because their last time that they did this 3 months ago was Randall Schwartz, who is quite the raconteur. So let's see that we can if we can follow him. Yeah, so we're going to talk about 25 years of my book, Data Munging with Perl. That's what the cover of the book looks like. To get things out in the open, to come clean. The book was actually published right at the start of 2001, but it was being written in 2000, which is how I can get away with saying 25 years of the book, published in February of 2001. So what we're going to go through over the next 45 minutes or so, a little bit of history about the book, how it got written, why suddenly there's a second edition, or why the time is now right, I think, for a second edition. What has changed over the 25 years since the first edition was written? Importantly, when and where can we get a copy of it? And then we'll have some time left at the end for a little bit of Q&A. So normally when I'm giving a talk, I'm very happy to field questions as I go, but because of the logistics of the Zoom thing, it'd be great if you could just hold your questions at the end, and then Alex will chair a Q&A session. Great. Okay. Moving on. Oh, this is what the new version of the book is going to look like. I kind of thought I would just update it a bit, make it look a bit more modern. So starting with the history of the book, and That sounds like a quote from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but I don't think it is. In order to talk about the book, I guess we need to start by talking about me and Perl. So I haven't quite been using Perl for 30 years yet. I started using it in 1996. In 1998, I started the London Perl Mongers. Brian Foy had started with help from Dave Adler, had started the whole Perl Mongers group idea. The idea of Perl Mongers actually meeting in real life. And yeah, so I decided that starting a group in London would be a good idea. In 1999, I went to my first OSCON, which was held in Monterey, that's in California, isn't it? Yeah. And whilst I was at that conference, I went to Mark Dominus did a Tricks of the Wizards talk. I think it's something that he did quite often at conferences, and he opened my eyes to a few bits of the internals of Perl that I hadn't really used before. And on the flight home from Monterey, I wrote a module called Symbol Approx Sub, which got a little bit of attention. I tell you this just to point out that during those couple of years, I'd started to get a little bit known in the sort of wider Perl community. The London Perl Mongers obviously came out of the gate roaring and were quite an important group. And people found Symbol Approx Sub quite funny. For those of you that don't know it, it's a module that you can use in your code, and it then allows you to misspell your subroutine names and they still get called correctly most of the time. And then the following year, we had the first European Yahtzee in London. Now, I never get tired of pointing out that I had absolutely nothing to do with the organization of that. I want to take no credit for that whatsoever. But because I was leading the Perl Mongers at the time, I was around and talking to people at the conference. And the other important thing that happened there was I gave my my very first talk at a conference, at a Perl conference, and it was on the book Data Munging with Perl, which hadn't actually been published at the time. And my publishers, Manning, said, this is a good opportunity to publicize the book, so you should give a talk. And the talk was terrible. I had no idea how to write a talk. I had no idea how to engage an audience. I just wrote a load of slides. I stood on the stage for 20 minutes. I bored people rigid. And I walked off that stage and I said to myself, I am never giving another talk. That I'm just not cut out for it. But fortunately, I'd also signed up to give a second talk the following day at the conference. And that was a lightning talk. We just started experimenting with lightning talks. So I gave a second talk on the following day about Symbol Approx Sub. And as you can tell from what I was telling you about it earlier, it's not an entirely serious module. And so people laughed. People got my jokes, and it was a 5-minute talk, and it went really well. So that completely overturned my my self-imposed ban on giving any more talks. So once you give a talk and people laugh at a couple of jokes, then you get kind of hooked on giving talks. And actually, I should also mention, I said earlier how I'm speaking here after Randall gave the last talk in this series. That first talk I gave at YAPSI, they got a special guest, and I gave my really boring Data Munging with Perl talk immediately after a really interesting talk by Charlie Stross, the science fiction author. So I really was up against it. And then from 2000 onwards, I've done other stuff, and we might get to some of that later. But this was where I was in the community as I started writing the book. So we go back a little bit in history and think about the book. In 1999, a lot of the Perl community happened on Usenet, Complang, Perl, MISC, and before that, Complang, Perl. And Perl was huge in those days. We were in the midst of the first .com boom. Perl was powering websites. Everyone was using Perl. Excuse me. Perl was huge, and Perl books were huge. The number of books that publishers pushed out about Perl between about 1999 and, I don't know, 2005, 2006, something like that. It was incredible. And Manning was a pretty new publisher who wanted to get in on this Perl book action. They thought they could sell a lot of books if they concentrated on Perl. So they popped up on Complang, Perl, MISC, and were asking if anyone would be interested in helping them out as technical editors, like reading through manuscripts, looking through proposals, that kind of thing. And I thought, oh, yeah, I can do a bit of that. That sounds interesting. So I volunteered, and I got involved in a bit of tech editing on some of the books that I'll mention over the next couple of slides. And then in 2000, I can't remember this chap's name, the acquisitions editor at Manning, he posted to all his technical editors a list of possible subjects. How do you think these books would sell? Do you know anybody that could write a book on this topic? Things like that. And one of the things on the list was text manipulation, because Perl's always been known as something that's really good at manipulating text. And I had a bit of a think, and I thought that's an area of interest to me. I could do something along that kind of line. So I wrote back to the acquisitions editor and said, yes, but let's not just do text. Let's expand it to all of data manipulation. And manipulation is a bit of a long word. Let's call it data munging. Munging is in the in Eric Raymond's jargon file, and it just means chopping up data, playing with data, rearranging data. And I got quite a lot of pushback from Manning because it was seen as a sort of fairly informal word to have in one of their book titles, but in the end, they decided that they would give it a go. So during that period, that next 2 or 3 years, Manning published quite a lot of Perl books. You might recognize some. I didn't remember all of these when I did the research for this slide, but it brought back some memories because I know I've owned and read all of these in their time. Elements of Programming with Perl by Andrew Johnson. Web Development with Apache and Perl. That was a good book. Minimal Perl by Tim Mayer. Extending and Embedding Perl. Object-oriented Perl is obviously quite a popular one. And this is the one that we're here to talk about today. And the interesting thing is, Manning wanted to set themselves up as a quality publisher. And so these are the covers that they chose for their first 6 Perl books. And you don't have to look very hard to realize that they were a bit trying to sell themselves as a bit of an O'Reilly clone. I know you understand, of course, that O'Reilly has this book of public domain woodcuts of animals that it picks its covers from, and Manning had this book of public domain images of, I don't know, medieval costumes or things like that, which is about as close as you can get to what Manning would to what O'Reilly were doing without having their lawyers come for you. So just move aside for a second. I'll tell you a little story about the publication of the book, which takes place in New York. So the book was published in February of 2001. And in April 2001, I just happened to find myself in New York City for reasons that I can't remember. I know I spent an evening with the New York Perl mongers, which is always a good idea, but that wasn't the purpose of my trip, I'm sure. Anyway, I was invited out to dinner by the publisher of Manning on one of the evenings that I was in town. And on that day, Slashdot published a review of my book. Slashdot, for those of you who are less than 40, is like Reddit for old people. That review was written by Chromatic, who was a friend of mine. So the review that he wrote was very, very positive. And some of you might not realize this, but Amazon sales charts don't actually measure sales. They measure the amount of interest in the book, or at least the number of views of a book's page certainly feeds into the sales chart. And this Slashdot review obviously included a link to the Amazon page for my book. So for the next 3 or 4 hours, my book was in the top 10 of the computer charts for Amazon globally, which all made for a very happy publisher when I met him for dinner a couple of hours later. He was extremely happy with me. I don't think he'd ever had a top 10 Amazon sales book before. So yeah, people seem to like the book. I got lots of good reviews. We sent out copies to Perlmongers groups and things like that. There's a few good reviews on Amazon. It still has a 4.8 stars on Amazon. People wanted to talk to me about it. I would go to conferences over the next few years, and people would stop you in the corridor and want to have a conversation about the book and tell me how a particular part of it had helped them solve a knotty problem. Something that I found a little bit weird, where people asked me to sign copies of the book. There are probably 3 or 4 dozen signed copies of the book out there in the world. All of which reminds me of some of you might know Danny O'Brien, who did the NTK newsletter many years ago, and I saw him once give a speech in which he paraphrased Andy Warhol, and he said in the future everyone will be famous for 15 people. And it seemed to me that that was the kind of fame that I had. I was pretty well known within what was actually quite a small community of programmers. I could walk from one end of a corridor to the other in a conference, in a Perl conference, and it would take me 2 hours because everyone wanted to stop me and talk to me. But you just step outside of the conference center, and of course, no one knows who you are. And it seems to me that that's a perfect kind of fame, the kind of fame that you can turn on and off at will. That makes me happy. So there were some longer term effects. I mean, writing a book looks good on your CV. It got me work. On occasion, it got me work that I didn't have to interview for. On at least 2 occasions, I've been in, because I'm a freelancer, so I work with quite a lot of clients, and I'd be in a meeting with a client about setting up a contract, and I'd be doing the touchy-feely, does your face fit with the manager? And then he would say, at this point, I'd normally invite a couple of members of the tech team up to give you a technical interview. But they've got your book on the shelf downstairs, so none of them feel up to interviewing you on technical stuff. So, it's a shortcut to getting work sometimes. All in all, it sold about 7,500 copies. Now, I've got nothing to compare that with. I mean, I know it's not Harry Potter or anything like that, but I don't know how many copies a reasonably well regarded book in a bit of a niche area. I don't know how many you'd expect that to sell. I mean, I know I've had conversations with Brian Foy, and I know the kinds of numbers that some of his books sell, and they're a lot bigger than that. But I don't know how it would compare with, I don't know, things like Mastering Algorithms with Perl or some of the smaller Perl books. Anyway, it went out of print just over 10 years ago, start of 2014. I got a letter from Manning saying, at the end of selling out of this print run, we aren't going to print anymore. So the book officially goes out of print, and we will revert all rights in the book back to you. So I put the PDF online for free so that people, and it's still there now, people can download the PDF of the book for free. I mean, it still gets downloads. And that's actually a little bit embarrassing because, to be honest, it's 25 years old. It's a little bit dated now. Which brings us on to the next section. Why a second edition? Well, as I said on the previous slide, people are downloading it, and it's a bit embarrassing because it's a bit dated. A lot has changed in Perl over that 25 years. A lot has changed on CPAN, I mean, as well as in the core of Perl. The way we write Perl now is dramatically different to the way we wrote Perl 25 years ago. Well, it's true for some of us, at least. And a lot have changed in the industry over that time too. And I like people reading the book. I like having a book that people find useful. But I'd like it more if they weren't getting advice from the book that was 25 years out of date. And that's been nagging at me more and more over the last, well, probably since it went out of print in 2014. And just to knock one thing on the head, does a second edition imply that I might be interested in a third edition at some point, because I mean, I'm going to put a stake in the ground now and say, here's the second edition. And of course, stuff will continue to go out of date. So will I be interested in doing a third edition at some point? Well, I think I've done myself a bit of a favor by setting low expectations here. I mean, ask me again in another 25 years. I'll be 87. So the answer will probably be no. And okay, so, but more seriously, why now? Why did I wait 25 years? And why is now the right time? Well, as I said, I've been thinking vaguely about it for 10 years, probably. Occasionally, I mean, if you bumped into me in a conference over that time, you might have even, in a bar late at night, heard me talking about I might do this. One of the issues is it's hard to get a publisher interested. Manning took the book out of print. They took it out of print without even considering having a conversation with me about updating the book. It's a sad fact of life that Perl books do not sell in the way that they sold in 2001 to 2004, that kind of era. But then there's ebooks, and this is something I've been interested in over the last 10 years or so. Ebooks make quite a lot of things easier. They also make quite a lot of things cheaper. The economics of ebooks are completely different. Some of you might have read, there's an interview on Perl.com that Brian Foy did with me, and it was during lockdown, so it would have been about 5 years ago, where I talk about the economics of publishing ebooks and why that makes ebook publishers more agile than more traditional publishers. And you might have heard of Perl School Publishing, a little boutique publishing company that I've dabbled in over the last probably 5 years. Published a few of Brian Foy's recent books. He's recently brought out a new edition of his Perl's new features, which is a kind of how to keep up to date with the new stuff in Perl book. And by publishing them through Perl School, we take advantage of all the economics of ebooks. And so as I've got more and more practice at doing that, I now figure the time is right to do it for a substantial book that was originally published by a traditional publisher. So I can now do it justice, I suppose. So I publish my own books, I publish other people's books too. But importantly, I can work to my own schedule. I don't have an editor on my shoulder saying, when's the new version of the book? When's this chapter going to be ready? I can do it at my own speed. Okay, so that was all the history. Well, one final bit of history, I suppose. I want to set the scene a bit and talk about what the world was like. Well, the IT world, because we've only got another 20 minutes or so. Things that we hadn't heard of in 2000. We'd never heard of Web 2.0. By the way, what happened to Web 2.0? Did it turn into Web 3.0? Are we on Web 4.0 now? Who knows? We only just started hearing about blogging. The heyday of blogging wasn't for another 3 or 4 years, 5 years after this. The whole idea of user-generated content was nowhere to be seen. There was no social media. MySpace was 4 years away. Twitter was 9 years away. The first Blackberries had just been released. I think at this time I was using a Palm Pilot. Does anyone remember Palm Pilots? So they were years away from smartphones. Nobody had a tablet. No one had fitness trackers or smart homes or anything like that. Even Wi-Fi. I said that I went to OSCON in 2000, and Wi-Fi there was provided. But do you remember when it was all with MCIA cards, those cards that slot into your laptop? They're about twice the size of a credit card. And O'Reilly at this OSCON, they had rented a huge pile of Wi-Fi cards, and so all the attendees could borrow a Wi-Fi card, and we were all standing around this stall getting a Wi-Fi card and trying to configure it, and the Mac versions obviously just worked, and then there was those of us with Linux on their laptops that struggling to get it working. And the whole idea of having, internet everywhere. In 2000, we all had internet, but it would all have been metered, and it wouldn't have worked when somebody else was using the telephone. And it stopped working as soon as you left your house. And just a few more things. We didn't know about mobile first or responsive design. We'd never heard of YAML or JSON. We'd never heard of REST or GraphQL. We'd never heard of large language model. Maybe if you were researching AI, you might have understood what a large language model was 25 years ago. But as far as I can remember, all the AI I heard about at this kind of time was expert systems and things like that. We'd never heard of cloud computing, DevOps, infrastructure as code, containers, microservices, CI or CD. These are all things that are new to the industry in the last 25 years. GitHub, we haven't even heard of Git. We were using CVS, I imagine. And Perl itself was very, very different. Core Perl has changed. CPAN has changed. There's not supposed to be a question mark there. Maybe a question mark. Let's talk about the Perl versions. When I was writing the book, Perl 5.6 had just come out in March. And that was the current version until the following year, just after the book was published. And then it was another year later before Perl 5.8 came out. And at the other end of the spectrum, of course, we've now got Perl 5.40. We now have this regular release cycle when a new version of Perl comes out every year at about the same time of the year, May, June time. So the current version of Perl as of January is Perl 5.40.1. That's a lot of version number differences in that 25 years. So what was new and exciting when I was writing the book? Well, Perl 5.6 had introduced use warnings. So no longer did you have -W at the end of the shebang line. Although actually thinking about it, I've just been through fixing a load of the code, and I was still using -W in my code then. 5.6 also introduced hour, a slightly less confusing way to access package variables. Now, I think that lexical file handles had been available before Perl 5.6, but something in Perl 5.6 suddenly made them easier to use. It also introduced the 3-argument version of open, So instead of using bare word file handles and appending the mode to the front of the file name as part of the open, it's all separated into 3 separate arguments. Some other exciting new things that came out in the last 25 years. Say, I mean, these are just things that I use a lot. I don't think I would always use say rather than print these days. State, the idea of state variables, defined or. I can't picture writing Perl code without defined or these days. It took me a while to get used to postfix dereferencing, but I'm in love with it now, and I use it whenever I can. Signatures, especially now that they are non-experimental, they make me very happy. And then there's, of course, there's the Karina new Perl 00 implementation that is slowly being implemented in new versions of Perl. And feature bundles, the easy way to turn a load of these features on and off. All these things were just nowhere to be seen back when I was writing the first edition of the book. Load of improvements to regular expressions. I think the /r modifier is absolutely wonderful. Named captures and storing them in, I mean, I'm not sure that %+ is a great name for a hash, but I still like the idea of named captures. The /p modifier, recursive patterns, possessive quantifiers, matching on Unicode properties, all these things that have been added to regular expressions over the last 25 years. In fact, some people don't realize this. Perl regular expressions are called regular expressions. It's a mathematical term. And because of the power in Perl regular expressions, at some point over the last 25 years, Perl regular expressions ceased to be strictly regular according to the mathematical definition. Things have changed on CPAN. In 2000, of course, there was the original Perl 6 announcement. And one of the things that led to was an explosion of CPAN modules as people firstly proposed things that they wanted to add into Perl 6 and then said, oh, hang on a minute, Perl is almost infinitely malleable language. Maybe I can write a CPAN module that does this anyway. So, I mean, we've got moo and moose. I can't remember the last time I've written OO code that used the old classic built-in Perl OO. There's type standard. I use that in almost all of my code these days. Try tiny is great, of course. It's certainly head and shoulders above using eval and then trying to remember which variable things have happened to. And of course, but now we've got try catch built into the language itself. Path tiny, something that again that's absolutely wonderful that I use all the time. This was the one that surprised me. I couldn't believe that test more didn't exist when I was writing the first edition of the book. It didn't come out until the following year, I think 2001, 2002 perhaps. And now we're even starting to move on to the next generation of testing tools with the test2 stuff. The Template Toolkit 1 was actually released in 1999, but no one used it until Template Toolkit 2 came out, which was in 2002, I think. We had no ORMs. We had DBI, and I mentioned DBI in the book. but we didn't have class DBI, and we've gone through the entire life cycle of class DBI, which is now effectively dead, and we now use DBIX class. But none of that was even thought of back in 2000. Obviously, we didn't have PLAC and PSGI, and this actually surprised me. All of the web frameworks post-date, well, at least all the serious web frameworks, even Maypole, which was the first of the real MVC frameworks on a CPAN, that didn't come out until 2004. And then since then, we've moved on to Catalyst and Dancer and Modulicious. So all this stuff, not around, couldn't have put it in the book because nobody had ever heard of it. Okay, so what has actually changed in the book? So as I said, we're now targeting Perl 540. So all of the new syntax that I mentioned a few slides ago, that's all going in the book. Lexical file handles, 3-argument open, postfix dereferencing, all those kinds of things. In fact, one of the first things that I did when I decided I was going to produce the second edition was to go through all of the code examples and rewrite them in something a far more modern version of Perl. CPAN, I've switched to using newer versions of modules, or newer modules rather. A good example is dates and times. There's a section in the book where I talk about dates and times, and I take 3 examples of a problem that you might have with dates and times. Something like, given today's date, tell me the day of the week that the first of the next month falls on. And I did that 3 ways. I did it by using just the built-in functions in Perl, so local time and time local and that kind of thing. And then I did it with date calc and date manip. But now in the second edition, I don't use those, and I use timepiece. I've got an example using timepiece and date time, and the code all gets shorter and easier to understand. There's not much OO in the book, but what OO there is has been rewritten to use mu rather than the standard built-in Perl classic OO. Text files. The first edition mostly covered ASCII files because that's what people used. It has some pretty basic coverage of Unicode, but if I'm honest, rereading it a couple of months ago, some of that is incorrect. It's bad. There's some bad advice there, so that's cleaned up. So in the second edition, I've extended the coverage of Unicode and fixed what I'd written about Unicode. Accessing web. I mean, what I'm doing here is just picking a few examples of things that are improved in the second edition. Obviously, to see the full list, you'll need to buy the book. But accessing web data is something that I talked about in the first edition. And we did a lot of web scraping. There's an extended example where I go to the Yahoo weather page and pull down the weather forecast for London using a CPAN module that no one's heard of anymore called HTML toke parser. The second edition uses web query or maybe web scraper as well. Maybe I'll do both versions. But less of it is going to be about web scraping. It's more about APIs these days because they're less fragile, and parsing HTML is for the birds. Down with XML. the first edition covered XML in great depth, and I don't know about anybody else, but it's at least 6 years since I had to parse any XML, and that was SOAP, and I hated it with a passion. So I'm going to cut down the coverage in the second edition, cut down the amount of XML, and I'm going to replace that with newer formats, because we don't deal with XML these days. We deal with YAML and JSON, and they're easier for the users to read, and the modules for dealing with them are easier to understand than the XML parsers. Oh, which brings me on to parsing. Now, listen, I've still got some things that I'm thinking about. I haven't made up my mind how things are going to work. So the first edition used parse rect descent. I seem to remember that Damien's big showpiece talk that he was giving around the conferences, probably in 2000, used parse rect descent for something incredibly clever, and therefore it was very. Is it okay to say it's trendy? Are Perl modules ever trendy? Everyone was trying to find a way to use parse rect descent, and obviously it still works, but I haven't used it for a very long time. I don't know if anybody still uses that. So maybe I'll replace it with a more up-to-date. What we're talking about here is a parser builder. We're not talking about parser. We're talking about something that builds a parser, defines a grammar. So I think there's Perl 6 rules, which also was written by Damien, which implements the kind of grammar side of Perl 6 or Raku. So maybe I'll replace the parse rect descent bits with Perl 6. And now there's a dilemma, and maybe in the Q&A, which we'll get to quite soon, maybe somebody's got some feedback, or if not, you can email me or something. In the first edition, most of the examples are based around a CD collection, my CD collection to be specific. But now I'm targeting people who don't have CD collections, may not have even ever owned a CD. So what am I going to do about that? Do I keep the same example for nostalgia? Do I switch to playlists? Or do I go the hipster route and talk about vinyl instead? Vinyl collection. Everyone's got a vinyl collection these days. So this is one of the reasons why the book's not finished, because I get things like this nagging at me. I don't know if anyone's got any opinions of what music-based examples I can use. I'd love to hear them. Okay, so let's talk about availability, just getting towards the end now. Because you're all thinking, oh, that sounds great, Dave. Here, take my money. Well, so this is the dog ate my homework slide. Towards the end of the year, last year, I made a lot of noise about the new edition of the book, and I was saying, oh, it's going to be finished really, really soon. Then I took on too much work, shall we say, and it rather impacted my time that I had to work on the second edition of the book. So it's not finished. It's still very much a work in progress. But I do have a plan. So I'm thinking the final version, or at least the ebook version, will be available at towards the end of April. The ebook will come out first. It will be available through LeanPub and Amazon. I'm still not 100% sure about the paperback. I did a poll of people that saw me talk about it at the London Perl workshop at the end of last year, and it seems that people still like paperbacks. But I don't think they realise quite how much more work a paperback involves on top of doing an ebook. So maybe there'll be a paperback. I mean, if you were to all deluge me with emails saying I must have a paperback, then maybe I would consider the paperback a little bit more seriously. But and this is a bit of the self-promotion bit, I have a newsletter on Substack which you can sign up at, and that will, over the next month or so, certainly concentrate on news about progress that I'm making on the book. So if you want to be one of the first people to find out when the book is actually released, that would be a good thing to do. There's the old book website, which is where people download the PDF from, and now currently it's still the old book website. But I want to put some effort into updating that so that it has information about the new book, so that the new edition of the book, so that will be a good place to follow what's going on, and that's quite simply datamungingwithperl.com, because funnily enough, nobody else wanted to buy that domain for anything. And this is, you're the first people to hear about this. I discovered that LeanPub do a work in progress thing where you can upload a book when it's not finished, and people can buy that book, and then as you make progress on it, you upload newer versions, and they will get the newer versions available in their library on LeanPub for free. So I have published, it's quite an old second edition version at the moment, but you can go to leanpub.com, Data Munging with Perl, and you can buy an ebook right now. And as it gets better over the next month, as new versions come out, as I finish more chapters, then you will get the updated version. That was about all I had planned to say to you. There's, well, you know my name, contact details, my email address. If you go to my links page, you can find me on all my social media platforms and all that kind of thing. So thank you for listening. I think now I will hand back to Alex, who might have a plan for how he's going to run a Q&A session. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, great. Great. If you can unshare your screen, we can go to full, we can go to go to the Q&A section.
There you go.
There we are. Perfect.
I saw some chat coming in. I'll catch up with that one.
Names on a black background. Okay, before we get to Q&A, Olaf has reminded me to mention that our September session in presumably 6 months' time is going to be lightning talks, and the registration for that is now open. So if you want to sign up for that, now it's 6 months away, so you've got plenty of time. But it's Toronto Perlmongers has had lightning talks for our September meeting. Right now, I'm thinking it would be virtual, but it's a possibility we might actually physically meet in a room and go through the talk. So we'll have to figure out the details for that. Anyway, that's the only announcement I had from the Toronto Perlmongers. And now, if you have a question for Dave, there is a control. Where the heck is it? So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a react shape, looks like a heart, and there's a raise hand thing right at the bottom of that pop-up window. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and then I'll call on you, and we can do this Q&A. Oh, there's something in the chat. Okay, can you see the chat, Dave?
Yes, I can. So I see Salve asking about recommendations for ebook readers. I don't think it's particularly a problem anymore. There used to be problems with compatibility across ebook readers. There used to be people, if you bought an ebook, you would get one of three things. Some people would sell you a PDF, and I've never really considered that to be an ebook because it's a fixed format file, and if you're reading it on something that's too small, you either can't read it or you're scrolling backwards and forwards in order to read across the entire line. The other thing was, the other two options were, there was Mobi by Mobi Pocket, which is the format that Amazon Kindle used. And then there was EPUB, which everybody else used. So if you had a Nook or a Kobo, you would need an ebook, but if you had a Kindle, you would need a .mobi. But Amazon have bowed to the inevitable, and they have killed off their Mobi ecosystem. So they now only support that. For a couple of years they've supported EPUBs, as well as they supported Mobi, but they now support only EPUB, or they're about to kill off their Mobi support. I mean, I think they'll still support previously bought books, but ebooks is what Kindles will support. So as long as you've got something that was built to a reasonably recent format of version of EPUB, it should work pretty well across any kind of ebook reader. And just to clarify that what I was saying about PDFs, the difference in what I call a real ebook, like a EPUB, is that when you're viewing it on a smaller screen, it reflows, so the page appears at the right size, and you can make the fonts larger and smaller so that you can read them more easily. So the answer is, it doesn't matter as far as I know.
Okay, great. And we've got a question from Simeo. Thanks very much for writing the books. His question was, how many...
What about profitability of books?
Yeah, the profitability.
So this is what I cover in that interview on Perl.com that we were talking about. The problem with traditional publishing, and I don't know whether Randall's still around, because he will certainly have an opinion on this, is that a traditional publisher pays for designer, they pay for proofreaders, they pay for copy editors, they pay for technical editors, they pay for marketing, they pay for printing upfront. It's a very, very expensive business. So from the $30 or $40 that you might pay for a computer book, the author in the traditional publishing route might make $2, maybe $3 a time, and the rest of it goes to the machine that produces the book. With an EPUB, well, with Perl School, we are far more agile. But I mean, we remove a load of those functions. We don't have a marketing department. We don't have a design department. I mean, the first 4 Perl School books all had the same cover, just with us in a different color, with a different title written on the top. And then when Brian Foy got in touch and said, "Do you mind if I start publishing my books through your imprint?" And of course, you don't say no to Brian when he asks you a question like that. He produced his own design, so his books all have a slightly different look to the rest of them. And then the new cover to Data Munging with Perl, that was just me in an afternoon with Canva and a bit of AI. So to get back with the original question, the profit margins on an ebook are far higher, but it's harder work for the author because they need to persuade people to do technical editing, and I'm happy to do a bit of proofreading and stuff, but I don't claim to be a professional at it. And you don't have the marketing, so you're probably not going to sell as many as you would if you had the power of O'Reilly behind you, or even the substantially smaller power of Manning. So it swings and roundabouts. If you put a book up for sale on, so I said out of the $30 that you'd pay for a paper book, the author might see $2. If you put a book on the Kindle store for $30, then the author might see $15, $18 of that. There's a lot more money per book, but probably fewer books and harder work to get there. Does that answer your question, Simeo? Happy to follow up if you've got further questions.
Yeah, I'm. That sounds like a good answer to me. And we've had some comments in the chat as well. Yeah, and Randall is basically saying, similar answer to what you were saying.
Yeah.
There's another question here. You mentioned you were targeting 5.40 plus and decide your OO examples would use Moo rather than feature class. Can you share your reasoning when making that decision?
Yeah, 100%. I love feature class. Karina, as some people might have heard it, and I use that for a lot of my personal code that I'm writing, but it has restrictions. It's still a work in progress. I don't, and I didn't want to push people towards something where, well, at the time that I started writing it, you couldn't, it didn't auto-generate writer methods. That's now, I think that's now out in Perl 540, but it doesn't have things like roles, which most, I think for general work, if I'm recommending to people, I think Moo or Moose is probably still the best choice for now. And it'll be a couple more years before feature class catches up.
Good. That sounds good.
I mean, between that still left me with the decision between Moo and Moose, and that depends what I'm doing. I love Moose, and a lot of stuff I'm writing these days seems to be running some code inside a GitHub action that then generates a GitHub Pages website. And on that case, you'll generate a Docker container that it has all the software installed that you need, But performance isn't particularly going to be a problem for you. So I would tend to use Moose in that situation because Moose has that bit more power than Moo does. Moo is more cut down. Whereas if I was doing something that had to be running in real time and returning data to people on the back end of a website, then obviously I would go with Moo rather than Moose because you lose a bit of the power, but you get more performance out of it.
Yeah, that's a good reason. And I guess at this point, Corinna is still a bit of a work in progress. So things could change, whereas presumably Moo and Moose are relatively stable at this point.
Yes. So Paul, who is basically driving
Mm-hmm.
the Carina Pearl class stuff, I think he feels a little bit stalled on it at the moment because I don't think he's getting enough feedback. He's being very careful not to push ahead with just his ideas or Curtis's ideas, and he doesn't. What they both want to completely avoid is going down one path and then having to backtrack at some point
Right.
in the future.
Um,
So until they get more of a sized group of people working on it,
mhm.
they're kind of loath to start to push forward too quickly. And someone's just said in the chat, can we clone Paul Evans? And that's, of course, absolutely correct. That is the best approach.
Yeah. I wonder if it means, I mean, we have the Perl tool chain summit occasionally
That's
where
coming up soon.
yeah, it's coming up soon where, well, Olaf, who's the instigator behind this talk, is a regular. It almost sounds like we need to have a summit for people who would make use of Corinna and come up with kind of turbocharge a bit of discussion so that he's got a bit, some ideas to work on.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, he was thinking about roles recently. I say recently, probably 4 or 5 months ago now, and he was asking people what they use roles for, and they got a few people came out. This was on P5P, the Perl 5 Porters
Yeah.
mailing list. But he he was slightly concerned, I think, that the suggestions that he was getting from people were people they were just reflecting back to him what roles do in Moo and Moose at the moment.
And he wants something
And
higher.
he thinks
Oh,
he thinks like we can push this out further. We can break out of the box.
yeah.
But I guess people have well, they don't know what they don't know, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I see Mark's got his hand up.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say it's from what I understand from Paul, it's sort of a chicken and egg problem. Um, you know, there's not enough people using Corinna in prod. Therefore, they're not finding the sharp edges to report back to him. And he's being admirably careful, as you said, but without that kind of feedback. So, somebody's has to be the appropriately shaped farm animal and at least say this is how you would do some of things in what's currently non-experimental feature class, which, yes, there's it's not at feature parity with Moo or Moose or anything, but you're not going to get there unless you start, maybe using the parts that are production worthy, and then shim in the rest with just regular manual code.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I'm just thinking, just something just popped into my head, and maybe Paul has covered this, and I just haven't seen it. But maybe a good approach would be to enable an easier way for people to write extensions for it. I mean, because the way that the Moose exploded was by people writing MooseX classes, and maybe if Karina supported that.
I think Paul tried doing that with some of the keyword extension modules that he's been building his stuff on. I know that the sort of playground that he has for it, that object something, I forget what it's called.
Object pad.
Object pad, yeah, makes heavy use of that. So that might be a way forward as far as like more, experiments, extensions, but I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an approach that P5P have been thinking about a lot, just for general improvements. Whenever someone puts forward an RFC, RFP, one of the first questions that comes back is always, can we implement this as a CPAN module, and then kick it around a bit, see if it works, and then take the good ideas for it and plug that into PBC. Yes, thanks, Ed.
Yeah, and in fact, putting logic like that into a module is terrific, because it means you can download it, you can tinker with it yourself, and then, as you say, once you've got the idea correct, then that can be moved from a module into
and you can get things wrong.
For him to,
as I say, this is the thing that Paul is really worried about, is getting things wrong and having to back stuff out. But if it's a CPAN module, that doesn't matter.
Okay. One more question has popped up in chat. Roy's asked, you plan to have a chapter dealing with Raku? I
don't. I expect you'd like an answer, an explanation, rather than just a statement. I think that I went through 18 years of being alternately excited and frustrated by first Perl 6 and then Raku. I would go to a conference and I would always make sure that I saw at least one Perl 6 or later Raku talk, and it was often Larry or Damien, and so it was an inspiring talk, and I would come away and I would get home and I'd sit in front of a tutorial to get myself up to speed in Perl 6, and I don't know what it says about my brain. I mean, people say that the fact that I love Perl so much says some dubious things about my brain, but people keep telling me that Raku is so much like Perl, and my brain just doesn't see it. I have tried and I have struggled, and probably about the time that they changed the name to Raku, I decided, okay, that's another language I mean, it had been another language for many years by that point, and I decided I have no need to worry about that anymore. I mean, as you worked, if you did the maths on the slide, I was talking about the third edition. I'm not that far from retirement now. If in the next 10 years before I retire, somebody gives me a good reason to learn Raku, and a good reason is probably will pay me to work on a contract to work in that area, then I would consider learning it. But I'm afraid that now I actually have no interest. I wish the team and the language all the luck in the world. It's not for me.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer. And I know I've had a similar experience where I look at this stuff and I think, wow, that's really cool. And then I try and get something done on it, and my brain is just, nope, sorry. Let's do it. Let's Perl 5, please. Or if you want to go way back, we can write it in C if you're feeling adventurous. Apart from that,
Yeah. So in the chat here, Randall says that he's moved on to Dart. I mean, I still do a lot of Perl stuff, but I've moved on to JavaScript, I suppose. That's my second language these days.
Yeah. Okay, well, I feel like we've come to the end of our questions. So, Dave, thanks so much for putting this presentation on for us. It's been really intriguing to hear about the history and the upcoming
Thank
book.
you for the invitation.
Yeah, well, we'll look forward to the book, I guess, at the end of April.
Something around then. That's I hope so. Yeah.
Well, if you're self-publishing, I guess you can give yourself.
I mean I guess that's the double-edged sword, because I can also oh well, okay, it can wait another week, but you know.
Yeah. Okay, and thanks to everyone for attending. I appreciate it. And the Toronto Perlmongers will be back at the end of September with our
Lightning
lightning talk.
talks.